This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Today, we are excited to release this Advent special. We welcome friends of the Vicars Crossing, best-selling authors Diana Butler Bass and Michael Coren. Diana and Michael have both written books about Jesus this year. Diana's book, Freeing Jesus, challenges the idea that Jesus can only be understood in a static, one-dimensional way and asks us to instead consider a life where Jesus grows with us and helps us through life's challenges in several capacities, as a friend, teacher, savior, Lord, way, and presence. Michael's book, The Rebel Christ, reminds us of Jesus who was a rebel, a radical, and a revolutionary who called for the poor and marginalized to be protected, criticized the wealthy and complacent, and condemned those who exploited others while turning their eyes away from those in need. Each of these books provides followers in the way of Jesus plenty to consider. Sit back, grab a coffee, light your Advent wreath, and enjoy these two internationally renowned writers discuss Jesus in the public square.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be. Welcome to another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. The Vicars Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Memorial Anglican Church in London. Happy Advent.
Yes, Kevin George here from St. Aidan's Anglican Church. Blessed Advent to all.
My name is Ian. I'm a producer and the person who gets us out to the world. Advent, yay.
Okay, so if you haven't figured it out yet, it's Advent, and this is a special Advent edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. So we're happy to be bringing it to you today. And guys, we've got some great guests on, friends of the podcast, of course, and returning to do a special edition with us today. We are going to be in conversation with two dynamic best-selling authors, Canadian Michael Coren and American Diana Butler Bass are joining us. And as we anticipate, see what I did there?
I like that.
As we anticipate Christmas, it's fitting, of course, we should have these two with us. Each of their books was released this year and focus on Jesus. Mm-hmm. Michael's book, The Rebel Christ, was released in November, and Diana's book, Freeing Jesus, Rediscovering Jesus as Friend, Teacher, Savior, Lord, Way, and Presence. Both are best-selling books and have much to offer us as those of us who follow in the way of Jesus. And so we've chatted about these books in previous episodes, and today we're going to hear Diana and Michael talk a bit about them and perhaps each other's writing and books too. So looking forward to having them with us.
That is awesome. Before we go too far into that, we want to acknowledge that the land upon which we record this podcast are the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. These lands continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples with whom we wish to work towards reconciliation. And as people of the church, we want to acknowledge the ways in which we have sinned and been complicit in those relationships in the past as we work to building towards a better future.
And we'd like to take a moment to say hello and thank you to our wonderful sponsors here on the Vicars Crossing. To A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. Many thanks to our good friend Dave Mullen, and hello to his entire staff over at A. Miller George today.
Yo, Dave, keep it real, man. Shout out to Carol Basada at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. Get yourself away from those big boxes and get over to this local store. She'll move your prescriptions. You'll get drugged up, and everybody will be happy.
And last but certainly not least, a huge thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And Trisha Lister was the wonderful human being who hooked us up with that one. So
I feel like they've been in your room because your room looks cleaner for some reason. But
really,
yeah, I think you've tidied or something, haven't you? Or what?
I tend to try and tidy as best as I can.
Okay, well, you're looking good today. Everything looks pretty
Thank
smart.
Your
Sweet.
bureau is sparkling, Ian.
Yes,
I must say.
it's a fresh
I've seen
start.
a lot of bureaus in my day.
It's a fresh
That's
start.
sparkling.
It's a fresh start for a fresh liturgical year, Rob. This is the first day of the Christian year that this is being released, and Ian wanted a fresh start. I suspect that as he cleaned, you could hear this music playing in the background.
It's beautiful.
Isn't that lovely?
Beautiful. Yeah, I can see him. Yeah, I can see him with his Swiffer.
Just
doing
around, just doing the thing. It'd be beautiful. Right. Yeah.
Lemon pledge.
I feel like nothing has changed in my background at all.
So something's cleaner. Something's cleaner.
There's a glow there, man.
There's a glow. There's not a guitar there anymore. I don't know.
Rejoice.
Right.
Rejoice.
Rejoice.
We'll come to you, O Israel.
All right.
Well,
all right.
That's enough of that. That's enough of that.
Ian a break here. All right, let's give Ian a break. So we got a lot to get to Mike and Diana. So guys, shall we invite them in and just get this conversation underway?
Let's get at it.
Oh yeah.
And we are back here on the Vicars Crossing podcasts, and our guests are here. Great to have, once again, good friends of the podcast, Michael Coren and Diana Butler Bass joining us, and Advent blessings to you both as we begin this new year together, and welcome. Good to see you both again.
Pleasure to be back.
Thank you so much.
I think we're straddling the border for the first time in the sense of guest, and these two own the distinction of being the only folks who've been, I don't know we have very many, but they're both two-time guests.
Okay.
Right.
Wow, it's like Saturday Night Live, isn't it? But funny.
Yes, right. Yeah. You guys could be like the Steve Martin and who is it that's always in a race with Alec Baldwin, isn't it? So
Alec Baldwin.
Yes.
I no violence on this show.
I was going to say I'd rather be a two-time guest than a two-timing guest.
Oh, well, that's
right.
right.
That's right.
Well, we're glad to have you both.
This time of year is a special one for all of us, and we're glad that you can begin Advent season with us, Michael and Diana. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about family is such an important time of year this year, and I know, Diana, you will be getting ready for U.S. Thanksgiving coming up this Thursday. Right. Kevin and I will be watching football.
That's right.
While you eat turkey. I don't know. We're kind of Lions fans. So
we will watch the Lions lose. But this, by the time this airs, Diana will have either survived a Thanksgiving dinner or not.
Or
that's
not.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Hey, Rob, you got the timing wrong there, you see. I've got to tell you, doing years of TV and recording Christmas specials in the summer.
Yeah,
be very careful. And
you have to.
Oh, it's really chilly out there, and it's July the 12th.
That's right. That's right. We got to be careful.
Well, one of the things that I did before I checked in with you all is I removed all of the different holiday apparatus behind me for Thanksgiving.
Okay. Perfect.
So the mum plant is gone, the little
geez.
blessings and thankful sign is gone.
Oh no.
And so yeah, but it isn't Thanksgiving here yet while we're recording, but it will be by the time
she's getting close.
That's right. Very close.
Yeah. Well, Thanksgiving, of course, coming up in the US, and Christmas coming up as well. And I know we'll be gathering with family. What we were saying before was we wanted to kind of be flies around the dinner table of Michael's family and Diana's family to listen to all those conversations that will be going on, especially after your wonderful books that have come out. Sometimes it's hard to talk about Jesus around the table. I don't know if that really comes up in your family conversations, but it certainly does once in a while. Yeah, with us and mine. So we know we live in divided times right now, no question about it. So what do you guys think about, how do we govern ourselves at the dinner table with what's all too frequent sometimes, that uncle at the table or that brother or sister that wants to say something that might be a little bit uncomfortable. How do you guys manage all that?
Well, I mean, we have 4 kids, none of them are Christians. and one converted to Judaism, married a Jewish girl, or sort of converted because 3 of my grandparents were Jewish. So I don't know what that's called really, but and the other 3 are indifferent, I suppose. But there's no embarrassing uncle. They're all progressive. I think one of my daughters probably holds me responsible for most of the crimes of the patriarchy. So no, I mean, maybe it's implicit in the way we love each other. But I mean, it's very multicultural. We have of their partners, one's German, one's from Senegal, one's from Peru, one's American. So actually, it's a very multicultural family because I'm part Russian, Jewish, part English. My wife is part South Asian, part Canadian. So I don't think a racist or a bigot would be enormously comfortable. I mean, I'm sorry to be, you know, to put them off and all that, but I don't think they'd be comfortable in our place.
Right.
You're
not inviting them over, Michael.
But only if we have them instead of the turkey. But we, you know, my wife is a very observant Catholic, and I mean, look, Christmas, we have 4 services on Christmas Eve plus drive-by communion. I mean, it'll be a very busy day, and of course, for all of us, because Christmas Day there's 1 service, and Boxing Day is a Sunday. I think I'm preaching, so it'll be a very busy time. So I'm sure the kids will say something like, "Oi, where's Dad?" Although they'll say it's Canadians because they're not from London. But we honestly, it's not one of those issues that particularly comes up, and if it is, I really don't think it'll be discussed. I really don't. But I would hope that the children would, by quiet witness, you know Gandhi's wonderful definition of the evangelism of the rose. Rose doesn't preach; the rose just is.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm no rose, believe me. But
well, aren't you England's rose?
That is our emblem. That's on the badge of the rugby team.
Yeah.
Who won every single game in the recent tournament? But
yes, congratulations.
No, I mean, I hope that by witness and example, there's something that maybe will bleed through. But otherwise, no.
Things can sometimes be more controversial in America, eh, Rob?
Oh, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Diana, is that
that's my cue, I guess.
Is that your cue? I mean, does this stuff come up around the dinner table? Are you guys able to kind of set it aside and just be
I'm really
with each other?
I'm struck by Michael's description of his family because we're going to go and be with my husband's family, at least a significant part of them, this Thanksgiving, which will have been a couple of days past by the time people hear this. In my husband's family, the idea of diversity are people who are born to German background families instead of Scotch-Irish ones.
Yeah.
It's just like, I have no idea how his family has been in the United States as long as they have been, and their DNA is like all UK. It's like no diversity whatsoever. And so everybody, the main diversity that we have are people who have decided to stay Christian and the people who have decided not to. And that would be about 95% of the people around the table have decided to stay. And just a small percentage of people have decided to leave altogether, no religion. And so what has happened is the people who have stayed are actually insanely is sort of committed to Christianity. My husband works in a Methodist church. I write the books that I write. He has a sister-in-law who's a theologian. He has a brother-in-law who is the head of a philosophy and religious studies department until his recent retirement at a Lutheran university. We have my other sister-in-law is a Roman Catholic hospice chaplain who just converted to Lutheranism. Because her new wife is a Lutheran pastor.
Wow.
You can get blessed around this table.
And so we have all this kind of crazy over the top pastors, writers, theologians, people who make a living and have a vocation, both in religious community. And the only thing that is going to be weird. This time is we're having Thanksgiving dinner at at one of the sisters' houses, and her husband is one of the 5%.
Oh, wow.
And so what that means is, to be gracious table guests,
Mhm.
the other whole bunch of us can't just be talking about Jesus all the time, because it's like, oh, okay, this might be your house, but we're taking over the conversation.
Mhm.
Just doesn't seem terribly polite.
Right.
So my sort of strategy always in conversation at their table is, when I want to talk about something theological or something I'm working on, I'm happy to do that over hors d'oeuvres or during the cocktail hour, what have you, at the party. But at dinner, I prefer it when my brother-in-law leads the way.
Sure.
It's his table.
So-
He gets to sort of set the pace
Sure.
of the conversation, and so there's a certain graciousness. I think that is part of that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, when you throw a little bit of politics into the mix, and how that sort of instructs, or perhaps how your faith instructs your politics, or your family's politics. I mean, that sometimes makes it a little more complex, no?
Yeah, I'll go, like, let Michael go in just a sec, because I'll just finish up with my family real quick. And that is, it is also the people in our family who have left a religion behind are also political conservatives. And so we're just the opposite of many American families. And everybody who is involved in church are really active in all kinds of different social justice causes, everything from gay rights to Black Lives Matter to, sort of anti-poverty initiatives, etc. So all of our political liberals are all also Christians, and our political conservatives are not Christian. So somebody should bring a tape recorder.
It'd be very fascinating.
No
that's for
kidding.
sure. Yeah. How about for you, Michael?
It's interesting, one of the things you said, Diana, about UK DNA. There's a wonderful irony here, paradox maybe, because I recommend you look, for example, at the England soccer team. DNA in England is not what probably the English diaspora think it is. Racial blending is very common in the UK. In fact, I think in my lifetime, it'll almost be the norm. And you see this in actors and famous people and sports figures, but also just in general society. I don't know what the figures are. I get the impression, though, far more than in the US, in North America in general, I think. Politics, well, again, I mean, Canada is different from the US. I mean, the term liberal here would indicate someone who's relatively conservative. We have a Liberal Party in government, and being raised in Britain, there's a great line in one of the Le Carre movies with Sean Connery, Russia House, I think. And Connery is being interrogated as a former British agent quite gently by an American intelligence agent. And the American, forgive my accent, says something like, your father was a liberal. And Sean Connery says, he hated liberals. He was a communist. And so I think the set position, really, if we do discuss politics, will be from a left of center point of view. We learn. I learn from. I mean, our kids range between. Frankly, I've forgotten their ages, and at this point in my life, I forget even their names. But they're between 24 and 33, as far as I remember. And they've taught me enormous amounts. Unless I think you allow the generational experience to sort of influence you, you're really missing a great deal. So I'm not shocked by them, but I'm interested by them in the way they relate to things. You mentioned gay rights. The whole LGBTQ2 issue, for many generations, they're almost post-gay. It's just, that's still an issue, really? And which, of course, is very, very pertinent to churches, because they could, even if they were interested in Christianity, which they're not enormously, if any church discriminated and wasn't accepting and affirming, that they'd be incredulous. They couldn't be part of it. our youngest daughter, whose partner is in Senegal. I mean, if you can't learn as a middle-aged white, am I still middle-aged at 62? I'll say anyway. As a middle-aged white guy, if you can't learn from the experience of a young black man, then you really are an idiot. Because I mean, you've got to see the world through his eyes.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful learning experience. I mean, I think I regard all of these things as being part of the gospel formation.
That's right.
And so politics, are they discussed? I mean, no, I don't know if they're discussed really.
Yeah.
One of the kids is more political than the rest. She works in theater.
Yeah.
I think exposed directly to politics. But beyond that, not enormously. I mean, what do they vote? They probably, I would think, half of them vote NDP, the other half vote Liberal, I would think.
Yeah. Well, you don't have Aaron O'Toole, although I did note recently, and I move on, but that you at least expressed some sympathy or empathy for Aaron O'Toole lately in your latest column. So that was pretty good.
For Diana, I don't know if you follow Canadian politics, and why would you?
Right.
But, Aaron O'Toole.
I do a little bit, but I don't know this name. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But he says a great deal. He's the leader of the opposition. So he's the leader of the Federal Conservative Party, but he has a right wing. I mean, he's a fairly moderate conservative, really. I knew his father used to come on my old TV show a lot, and then they're fairly progressive conservatives. But he has a right wing in his party, and they detest him, and they want to get rid of him. And they're, I wouldn't say they were Trumpist, but they're pretty right wing and anti-vax, quite a few of them. And so this poor guy, if he does silence them, they'll turn on him. And if he doesn't silence them, they'll stab him in the back. So
yes, and he'll never get elected if he doesn't silence. Like, I mean, he's in a can't win.
Exactly.
Anyway, to shove forward, Advent, right? So here we are, as you're listening to this, the first Sunday of Advent. Thomas Merton wrote, "Into this world, this demented inn in which there's absolutely no room for him at all, Christ comes uninvited." You've both written wonderfully successful books about all manner of being in the church and in your own faith lives and so on. This year, each of you, respectively, have also written books now about Jesus, specifically this year. And we've had both of you on here. Both books have just been so instructive to us in our own walk. I think this is the first book for each of you that focused specifically on the person of Jesus or the personhood of Christ. Have you had a sense with the release of your books, these two books, that they are openly discussing Jesus in the public square the way they do, that it might sort of be like showing up with the uninvited guest that Merton talks about in Advent?
Yeah, I definitely have had that sense. A couple of strange moments along the way. Of course, releasing a book during a pandemic has been enormously challenging. And so I have no sense in relationship to all of my other books that this has been anything resembling a normal book launch, where I would be in a lot of places, wonderful rooms with people who would be receiving the book and talking to me and asking questions, and I'd be refining things. And so none of that has happened. But there were two really kind of strange angles, I think, to the book launch. One is it was very difficult to get any kind of liberal or secular media to want to have a book on with Jesus in the title. And that is a huge change here in the United States, because as recently as probably about 10 years ago, if you wrote a book about Jesus, the more controversial, the better. So somebody like Reza Aslan or Bart Ehrman or very sort of liberal scholars or even non-Christian writers would put out a book with Jesus in the title, and everybody would just sort of glom onto it. People would argue about it, and it would sell huge numbers of copies. Well, my publicist at Harper was literally told by booking folks across the American media landscape that they couldn't book a guest whose book had Jesus in the title.
Wow.
And that was really shocking to me, because that has recently not been the case here. And so that seems to show some sort of change in the media. And I think it also shows certainly the progressive media has become increasingly hostile to religious themes among their guests. And so that's not something I've experienced before. And then I think the other sort of funny moment came for me when the recent Christian Century review came out. And Christian Century, you know, is the moderate kind of mainline Christian magazine here in the States. I know lots of people in Canada get it too. But you know, it's always considered to be more of the voice of liberal Protestantism, which is, you know, kind of moderate these days. But the review said, this is not the kind of book you'd expect from a person who is seen as a progressive. And they also said, you wouldn't expect this kind of devotional book from a person with a PhD in religious studies. It's like, wait a second, these are the two biggest backhanded compliments like ever. And so from both the kind of the religious media saying, oh, well, progressives don't write about how they love Jesus, and then from the secular media saying, well, I don't want to talk about Jesus anymore. It's like the response has been strange, and I haven't even really kind of understood the ground that I'm standing on. And then of course, you know, sort of conservatives here and evangelicals here have their own publishing houses, their own media, et cetera, and they wouldn't get within a 10-foot radius of me. So it's been a hard thing, you know, having a book about Jesus, trying to find an audience in the midst of this cultural moment. So I don't know if that's similar for you, Michael, or not, but this is a big surprise for me.
It's really quite strange. It's the direct opposite. First, though, the context is radically different. We don't really have a religious media in Canada.
No.
And I'm not saying that to be flippant, but I mean, we really don't. We have denominations have their newspapers. They are not, with all due respect, they're not very good. Some of them are absolutely dreadful. None of them are influential, really. I remember I contacted I'm an Anglican priest, and I contacted the Anglican Journal and asked if they'd like me to write a column. I might have told you this, Kevin, about the book. And they didn't respond initially. Finally, I got through to someone. It seemed a little awkward. They said, well, we don't really do that sort of thing. And so not that it would have mattered very much, but, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here, but I'm a best-selling author. I hosted TV and radio shows for 20 years. I've got a glowing blurb from Stephen Fry, one of the most famous people in the world, for goodness sake. And, you know, plus from Sir Dermot McCulloch and leading Christians. But no.
Not the Anglican Journal, though. We have high standards.
Well, exactly.
We don't do that kind of thing. We don't talk about Jesus here.
Elsewhere, I mean, it's almost blanket coverage. Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Exode in the Toronto Star, Exode in Now magazine. Which couldn't get much more left-wing than that, really. Walrus, Globe and Mail column, Steve Paikin on TVO, CBC, Sunday Magazine, every radio station you can imagine. Which is what I wanted, because I mean, mainly I always try to appeal to a non-Christian audience. I mean, you've got to remember, and Dan, I'm sure you know this, so forgive me, but Christianity, the evangelical world in Canada is about 11%, and it has very limited political clout. It's a very Catholic country. We're about 42% Catholic, but that's really based on ethnicity. First of all, we have French Canada, but beyond that, we had waves of immigration from Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Eastern Europe, and so on. Most of those Catholics, though, would define themselves much more as Canadian than Catholic. There's no Catholic vote anymore. So it's a different world. But in terms of, no, secular media were very, I mean, there were people who didn't take the book up, but I mean, Elizabeth May, who was leader of the Green Party of Canada, one of the more or most respected politicians in this country, she tweeted her support, you know, by this book. It was absolutely lovely. but as I say, Christian, there is a TV show, 100 Huntley Street, with it, which is an evangelical show. But some years ago now, they banned me. I shouldn't say banned, but I used to guest host from them, and they cut all ties with me because of my, I think the quote was, because of my views on gay marriage. So they weren't going to talk about the book.
No.
And there's been no exposure in the US because, I did ask a couple of people, but they showed no interest. UK, though, different again. I mean, UK is even, like, if you're grading it, the United States, religiosity, sky high, I think way too high. Canada, and then the UK, even though we have an established church in Britain, very little interest at all. But that comes out next week in the UK. I think there'll be, I write regularly for the New Statesman magazine, which is a highly respected magazine, socialism and social democracy. I will ask if I can write something. There's a good chance they might say yes, I don't know. But there is interest there too. So different. But I'm fascinated by what you said about the American exhaustion with, but I'd like to think I see that as a good thing. I mean, part of my, please don't take this personally because it's not meant to be like that, but part of my problem, part of my analysis is the problem is not so much Christianity, the problem is America. And forgive me, but what I mean by that is, because
I say that all the time.
Thank God. I was worried for a second 1812 was going to come back before us.
It's like, no, I look at Zillow on my phone to see if there's real estate I can afford in London, Ontario.
Oh, there you go. I just wanted a podcast, and all of a sudden we burned the White House down. Like, what are you going to do?
So anyway, keep going, Michael. You're talking to a very friendly, worn out American here.
Yeah.
Because of I was raised in a secular working class, half Jewish family in London, and my view of Christianity was absolutely beautiful. It was gentle, loving, Christmas. There was nothing negative about it. It simply culturally wasn't what we were part of. And then as I matured and I came to live in Canada and was exposed to American Christianity, and I know how many wonderful American Christians there are, but because of the cultural and emotional and political significance and influence of the US, a lot of what people see as Christianity is the conservative American version of Christianity, which increasingly has nothing to do with Christianity. I think there was a time when, for example, you had the seamless garment movement, the anti-abortion movement, but it was linked. I mean, it was a form of Christianity, certainly. But now I think it's become an alternative. And I mean, they wouldn't like this, but I think actually it's become pagan. I think it's almost pre-Christian, and it's nationalism. And the influence of that is felt everywhere. And I'm sure that secular media in the US also feel it. What's his name? The guy, the late night, the Catholic.
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert. I mean, he obviously is a very thinking Catholic. But I wonder how he proceeds with, I mean, I've heard him actually quote lines from A Man for All Seasons without acknowledging it, by the way. And I think he's a man who really takes his faith very seriously. But it can be embarrassing. And one of the first things I have to do in Canada is, and I'm trying to do this and sometimes getting through, I think, is get past the resistance of people who, when you say Christianity, I talk about this in the book, it's a premise really, is something which is very unpleasant. It's dictatorial and it's intolerant and it's condemning and it's homophobic and it's on the right. And when to get through that is very difficult. And as much as I laugh so much about the US, I do blame the United States because that didn't exist in the UK. They didn't exist in Canada. The Labour Party in Britain was said to owe more to Methodism than to Marxism.
That's true, yeah.
The NDP, which is our Social Democratic Party, Diana, the NDP was largely founded by a Baptist minister.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know, this notion of being a Christian means you have to be conservative, and I don't mean moderately conservative, but harshly conservative, is far more American than it is Christian. And it doesn't exist. I mean, my father's family well, from Russia, and I have part of that. I have this constant ambivalence about my identity. You know, why my hair fell out, I think. But
yeah.
Russian Orthodoxy is part of Russian culture. Very few people go to church anymore in Russia, in spite of what people in the West think. But Putin has managed to use this as part of the identity. When Stalin was fighting the Nazis, and the Orthodox Church had been persecuted and expunged from society, he suddenly reached out to the church because it was the Great Patriotic War. So it's always there in other countries as well, but it's not as on the surface and obvious and frequent as I think it is in the United States, and has been for quite some time.
And what you've described there is certainly a place to which Merton's Jesus would be uninvited. Like that's that. I mean, and that's in Christian. People who call themselves Christian, the Jesus of Scripture would not be a welcome guest. Sorry, go ahead, Diana.
Well, I was going to say this is the fight that we've been having in Christian circles for basically my whole lifetime. And the internal fight between the kinds of Christians that you're describing in Canada and in the UK. I mean, I grew up in this incredibly gentle Methodist church environment in Baltimore City in the 1960s, where, you know, we were dealing with stuff like racism and Vietnam, but my church was the place where I actually heard things that would counter racism and things that made me stop and wonder if Vietnam was the place that we should be, you know. And so, you know, we were sitting in Sunday school as a little kid, and Jesus is your friend, and you're singing songs about how Jesus loves all the little children of the world, and the posters, you know, barring the sort of mythology that every American church has that white Jesus poster in it. My church didn't have that poster growing up. My church had visual depictions of Jesus that looked as close to a sort of a Jewish Jesus that you could find in a Methodist church in the 1960s in the United States. And so it was, you know, basically brown-skinned Jesus. And so there was this constant vision of Jesus and this constant vision of ecumenism and also diversity that was part of my growing up. And then there were people who were saying, hey, you know, maybe we don't want to be in the jungles of Vietnam killing people for no perceptible reason, and that Jesus wouldn't like that. So this is the kind of thing that I grew up with. And what I didn't know is that I had been born into a big fight that was going on in American Christianity. And it was a fight that my Methodist church would lose. And eventually, through the course of my lifetime, the word Christian has, not even just the word Protestant, but the word Christian has become coterminous with this sort of nationalist religion that is associated with not just the Republican Party. I mean, I could kind of stand that in the sense that you're saying that you were defending this one guy who's kind of like a moderate conservative, but outright nationalism to the point where, and I think this is what framed my book coming out, is that on January 6th, this last year, at the Capitol insurrection, there's this one very famous photograph. I think it's going to go into every history book from here on out about American history. And there's a picture of the gallows where this incredibly fascist crowd wanted to hang Mike Pence. And, you know, I mean, I used to think that I wanted to hang Mike Pence too.
Well, you finally found agreement with the religious right, Diana.
I mean, at least I went to hang his opinions out to dry.
There's a lot going on this podcast today. I don't know where this is all.
But so, you know, hang Mike Pence, and they're like serious about it, put a rope around his neck and lynch the guy. And I'm feeling sorry for Mike Pence. And in the same frame over on the other side of the picture, there's a guy holding up this big sign that says Jesus saves. And he wasn't thinking that that was a counter to the gallows. He thought that those two things went together. And I'm thinking, wait a second, this is problematic because the Romans put like Jesus on a gallows, and this whole thing is a mess. And so what you describe, that's the war we've been fighting within our denominations, within our churches, and people like me lost.
So that actually takes me to the next thought that I wanted to ask you too about, just in terms of where things are at currently. And the big news, of course, out of America this past week was the Kyle Rittenhouse acquittal in Kenosha. And in the wake of that verdict, there's been a celebration for many on the religious right. Pardon me. You had people like Representative Bobart tweeting "Glory to God," for this verdict. His defense was largely supported by right-wing Christian crowdsourcing. They've really hitched themselves to the gun movement in many ways. Lest we make the mistake of thinking this is just something that is an aberration to America, we have to realize too that here in Canada, it was Gerald Stanley not so long ago who, when Colton Bushy, a 22-year-old Indigenous man of the Cree Red Pheasant First Nation, was shot dead on a rural Saskatchewan farm. And Jerry Stanley stood trial for second-degree murder and a lesser charge of manslaughter, but was also acquitted. Also plenty on the Christian right in this country, as Michael has pointed out, not quite the same thing, but still there were those who celebrated that. Robert Jones, who's been a guest on here, wrote a piece on Religious News Service last week, pointing out that recently released data from PPRI, American Values Survey, shows that today a frightening number of Americans, especially those who are white, conservative, and Christian, believe that violence may be necessary to quote unquote save the country, which is the sort of thing that you saw on January 6th. He goes on to point out that 1/4 of white evangelical Protestants in the United States and 3 in 10 who are Republican agree today that true American patriots may have to resort to violence if that's what it takes to save the country. Can I get a reaction from the both of you about this sort of troubling trend amongst the religious right, which is decidedly different here in Canada, I know, but still that sort of, and we hear it even in the conversations around COVID and vaccines and, protecting one another. There are those who have this sort of reckless attitude on the right about the lives of others. So I just wonder if we can get some reaction from each of you on that. Perhaps we'll start with you, Diana, as it's largely the Kenosha thing is right there in your backyard.
I'm thinking about your question in relationship to Advent, which I think is thematically interesting. We read these passages in the lectionary, and there's this expectation in Advent about the signs of the times and some sort of apocalyptic, the revealing of God's presence in the world. And certainly we go up into Advent with some pretty explosive texts about the end of the world, really. And so there is this kind of Advent expectation that points toward this sort of cataclysmic ending of one world and the dawning of this new age, the age that is to come. And I preached a sermon not this week and this past weekend on Christ the King, but the weekend before that. And I actually addressed some of these texts. And it's really a difficult line to walk right here, because when you're preaching on those texts, depending on who's listening to them, they can result in, I always am asking myself now, is Kyle Rittenhouse sitting in this congregation, when I'm preaching? Yeah. And is somebody like that going to grab some gun and go out into the street and try to bring about the kingdom of God for themselves? And the text that was the one that I was preaching on was basically the text in Mark about the temple being destroyed.
Destroyed in 3 days.
Right. And so I spent a lot of time in my sermon about the Bar Kokhba revolt and what was going on with that text, and that it's not to inspire our rebellion in that sense, but what it is to try to help us make sense of when worlds come crashing to an end. That it actually winds up being a pastoral text, What happens when everything doesn't go your way, rather than a text that's meant to inspire people to go out into the streets and start burning down buildings. And so I think that this is just a really weirdly sort of interesting time to stop and consider what apocalypse and apocalyptic advent expectations are, vis-a-vis the political environment in which we live, and what kind of Jesus are we really anticipating coming into the world. So I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question, but what I don't want to do, and I'm now much more aware of it than I ever have been before, is when I'm preaching, take the poetic piece of apocalypse so far that it can actually function as kind of a spark in what is a clearly very violent moment in American history. So those are just some of my thoughts that
Michael?
really does sort of mesh theologically with where we are right now.
Michael?
I bet there's not another podcast where Bar Kokhba is discussed. I can't imagine there are too many. They really didn't learn their lesson the first time, did they? Let's do it again, because this time we'll beat the Romans.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I think that line was in my sermon, actually.
I love it.
What does it mean, Kevin?
Oh, I'm not going into that. You come on now. How about that?
Oh, he's forgotten all his Hebrew. What happened? I was watching on TV, and the acquittal didn't surprise me at all. I think in many ways that stupid young man is a victim of a dark culture. And the gun culture, which I think is unique. There are countries that have gun issues. I lived in Israel for a year, and believe me, there are a lot of guns in Israel. And I can tell you, guns are not treated in the same way as they are in the United States. I remember a friend of mine came to visit me when I was there. I said, come over and stay with me. And he came to the airport, and I picked him up, and he said, oh, none of these guys wear these short sleeved safari jackets. I might get one of those. I really like that fashion. I've not seen it before. And I said, they wear them because there are guns underneath, for goodness sake. They're wearing them.
Not a fashion statement.
So there are lots of guns, but they're not treated in the same way. And there is this fetish about the gun. I sound very anti-American. I'm sorry, I don't really mean that, but it is very strange, and it goes back to a perverted history. And I don't want to play the Brit here, but the American Revolution was not really what people think. And the British did send an army most of them were German, but sent an army a very long way. The French and Indian Wars had cost a fortune, and to defend often the Americans and their interests. And then the British said, could you pay a tiny fraction of what we actually pay in taxation to help? We know you won't pay anyway, but we'd like to impose it. And they said, no, you can't do that. And they had a revolution where most of the people, in fact, supported the crown. But this time, I still hear people saying redcoats. What are you talking about, redcoats, for goodness? And what militia meant and what guns represented. But this has become contemporaneous issue, the adoration of the gun. And that kid, you mentioned the Canadian example. That was bad enough, but that was someone using a gun in his own property, and the whole thing was awful. But compared to this guy going somewhere with this lethal weapon,
right?
And then the media coverage of it. I mean, CNN. I know, believe me, I know there's a station that's far worse than CNN, but CNN's coverage was grotesque. It was just panels and panels of very well-paid lawyers talking about who won and who didn't win. And the prosecution was feeble, as it was with O.J. Simpson. So media coverage, legal system, gun fetish, political commentary. There are lots of problems here, which it wouldn't matter so much in an insignificant country, but in one as powerful as the United States. that is also so revered by so many, and deservedly so, because it's given so much to the world in so many ways. It is problematic. I mean, the violence that are, I mean, I think there is a way to explain all of the violent or semi-violent images and references in the New Testament. The Hebrew scriptures are something different. They're a history of a people.
Yeah.
And we're not always meant to say, yes, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, because it's not a good thing. Right. It's an ancient text and must be understood in that way. But I think in the New Testament, in particular the Gospels, we can interpret what is being said. And as for any eschatology in the book of Revelation, this is a poetic, allegorical text. And anyone who takes it literally is on very shaky ground indeed. I'm not a pacifist. I do believe there is room for just war. I think the criteria is extremely high and it's very, very rarely been met. I do think that Lytton Strategy, you may have heard of, a British writer in the First World War, he was a pacifist and he was gay at a time when being gay was not acceptable, but he was gay. And the board that heard him and heard his case for not fighting in the war, they said, Mr. Strategy, well, let me ask you a question, sir. If a German soldier threw himself on top of your sister and tried to rape her, what would you do? And he said, I would position myself between the German soldier and my sister. I digress. But I do think that, not the First War, but there are wars, sometimes an aggressor has to be stopped, but it's very rare to happen. But it's the, we spoke about conservatism. Eisenhower was a fine general who cared passionately about the well-being of those who served under him. And as a president, I mean, he preferred playing golf to governing. But the thing is, as leader of the Republican Party and president, he warned of the military-industrial complex.
Right.
He said only someone who has never seen war would want to fight war.
Right.
He intervened during Suez, which was problematic for Britain, but he was right to do so. He said, if you go ahead with this, we'll devalue the pound effectively. So there was a tradition of conservatism. William Wilberforce wasn't actually a conservative, he was independent, but he was very friendly with Pitt the Younger and was very much a conservative type MP. The Conservative Party in Britain supported the welfare state in 1945. I think conservatism has moved right. It's moved right all over the world. And that's a problem, but it's taken Christianity with it. And as it's done so, it's sort of dragged it away from the left. Yeah. And so those people who are Christians on the left find it increasingly difficult to glue to that position and not face ridicule or disbelief. But what happened recently with the trial and the verdict on so many levels, it was tragic to watch. It was absolutely tragic to watch.
Yeah.
Just listening to you, Michael, one of the things that I think about a lot is that these three countries, and of course, Australia, New Zealand, and a couple other major places in the world too, we have this shared history of British colonialism. And so that history continues to have these rippling impacts through all of our societies, and it does it in different ways. And so the example of the First Nations man in Saskatchewan and the Rittenhouse case in Wisconsin, I think that's a really interesting example, because what we've got going on in both of those, behind and under and through all of that, is race. Is that, white people are better. They're at the top of the social, biological, intellectual, spiritual pyramid of the world. And that's where we deserve to be. And that everything else is perceived to be some sort of threat. And we've dealt with that in different ways, and we've institutionalized it in different ways, and we've tried to take it down in different ways and all that kind of stuff. But I think that the last piece that you talked about is so, it's just, to me, it just feels so truthful, is that we're still in this place where we have not really ever dealt with the racism of colonialism. And what's happening now is in all of our countries, I think the fear of climate change, I think, just makes us all a little nuts. All those studies now they're showing that climate change actually makes people mentally unbalanced. So we have that, but then we have, these massive waves of immigration. We have what you were talking about originally, diversity that is manifested in marriage across racial lines, and communities that were once racially segregated now being integrated. People are terrified by that. White people are terrified by that. And so there's this way in which the right, which has always been like a bit more overtly awkward about race, has pulled even further right, and they're going into these nationalisms, and they're ethno-nationalisms that are tied to religion. And so it's more than just, MAGA, make America great again. It's white MAGA and Christianity. It's an ethno-nationalist religious state is the where people are fleeing because they're terrified, I think, of dealing finally and completely with race.
I agree to a large extent. I mean, it is not all white people in the countries you mentioned. New Zealand, for example,
very different.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. It is to a certain extent a bicultural nation, but there were two Maori wars that were extremely fierce, and a limited settler population. So partly goodwill, but also out of necessity, the country came to a new formation, and it's still not complete equality, but compared to US, Australia, and Canada in terms of indigenous people, it's far superior. The numbers are very different. I also think something as ostensibly trivial as sport, because rugby is so iconic in New Zealand. It really is. Two of our younger son played professional soccer in New Zealand, and he said when the All Blacks play, the streets are deserted.
Yeah,
everyone is watching the game, and the team is very. If you look at the team, it's very much you can see mixed race, white, Maori. So it changes the structure of society. Australia, absolutely appalling. Australia had also a racist immigration policy far later than any other nation. It was almost apartheid-like. Brits could get in, but if you had, huge restrictions on immigration. I don't know when that was ended. And Canada, we are gradually waking up to the issue, but it's taking a very long time. But there are also, though, we also acknowledge this. Outside of the white population, there are minorities that have moved to the right. What you're seeing in the UK is particularly, now again, generalizations are always dangerous, but have a look at the British cabinet and see who's in positions of power there. There are some people who are second generation, third generation British who are certainly not on the left. And I saw this with the Jewish community actually as well, where people who'd gone through a tough time of racism and discrimination and really bad stuff would say, well, we got through it, we put up with it, but why shouldn't they?
That's right.
And I think you will see this from various other immigrant groups from Southern Europe and elsewhere who have that attitude. Well, why are they complain? I don't think they've embraced the true nature of what systemic racism really is. But these are, what is so painful is that Christianity should be this great beacon saying, no, we've got an alternative to this. We really do believe in the human family, and there is a way forward, and it is a permanent revolution, and it is dangerous, and it is radical, and it's frightening in many ways, and it's beautiful. But and many of us are, but quite a few aren't. They're retreating into a bunker, and that's very sad.
Right. We want to kind of bookend the podcast here. Again, getting a little back to Advent as we begin this season together, and that's just a great segue, Michael, as we end our time together. But because we can't discuss the season of Advent without mentioning Mary and her Magnificat. And I was wondering, Michael, if you'd be so generous to read the Magnificat for us, and then have a question on the other side.
I shall. And Mary said, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their heart. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever. Amen. You know, that was banned in some countries.
That's right.
Oh.
That's right.
Seriously.
I think, Rob, are you with us? I think we lost Rob somewhere in there. So while we see what's going on with him, I'll pick up.
Yeah, I think it's frozen. Yeah.
Oh, he went and he might be back. Are you back,
There
Rob?
he is.
I'm back.
All right, buddy.
I didn't know I went away, but I'm back.
You went away. You came back. I think you had a question after that beautiful Magnificat. Thank you, Michael. That, as he pointed out, has been banned in countries
That's right.
at times. So go ahead, Rob.
Right. Well, that's just it. And is it even possible, as I mentioned, to talk about Advent without that, but certainly about Jesus in the public square? We have to consider the Magnificat. And as Michael said earlier, that song decidedly proclaims a different way, and that Christianity can be a beacon to that. So I wanted to ask both of you, as we end our time today, can you both share a little bit about maybe how Mary's words in your mind lend hope to us who wish to continue to talk about the life-giving way of Jesus as part of living our lives in the public square, and what that means to you? And I'll start with Diana.
Oh my. I was just drinking those words in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whenever I hear them, it reminds me that the people who are at the bottom of social pyramids are often the people who hear the voice of God most clearly. And so, I'm constantly reminded of what a complete outsider Mary was, and a person who should have never been, in any rights, means, or purposes, been remembered by history. And yet we have these words, this song, the story of her motherhood, and so many other stories of her through scripture. And she is remembered. And she's remembered for some pretty radical reasons. I'm just really grateful that scripture preserved that for us.
Right.
I think it would have been easier for the first Christians to leave all that stuff out.
Yes.
It certainly would have been less controversial.
Yeah.
And yet they gifted it to us.
Right.
So I treasure that.
Perfect. Michael.
This is a teenage Jewish girl living in an occupied part of the world that is really unknown. Most people in Rome would hardly even be able to place it on the map. And do you remember that song? One of the lines was, "What if God was one of us?"
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
Jewel.
Was it?
I think it
I'm
was
pretty sure.
Yeah.
But God became one of us very specifically and explicitly through this teenage Jewish girl, powerless, who could easily have been stoned to death. And he became one of us in human form in this great act of love and solidarity, not as a warlord, not as a king, not as an investment banker or a major TV host. He came into human form as the son of a carpenter or skilled craftsman, upper working class, knowing he would be arrested and humiliated and tortured and spat at denied and abandoned by those closest to him, and then murdered. He knew that. He became one of us in human form through that teenage Jewish girl to show that we're not alone, to show absolute solidarity with us, to feel what we feel, and to show us an alternative way forward to live our life. That's what I take from that.
Wow. Well, I think that as I listen to you both speak to that, and knowing what we're coming into now in this season, it just really gives us all pause, I think, to consider the ways in which we have to come to grips with a God who will show preference and deference to those who are hurting and alone and disenfranchised and vulnerable. And we have these conflicting messages in the church, where we speak of Christ as a king, as we did last week, and this Magnificat, right? And so it's really it's a powerful statement. And I just want to say that whether it's Freeing Jesus or The Rebel Christ, which are your two books, each of them in their own way has been for me and the important reads in this year, because they've pointed us towards these sorts of words. Your words have refocused us towards Magnificat language. Each of you in your own way have tried to direct your readers to come to understand that this Jesus whom we profess and whom we follow does identify with those who are, and in many cases, maligned and hurt by the church itself, by the institution. And it's that sort of refreshing approach that for us here on this podcast and those who listen to it, for which we are most grateful. And like Michael said, it's not everywhere that you're going to be able to come and talk about the second Jewish revolt. Maybe next time we get together, we can talk about the first one. But it's marvelous that we did. So we're just grateful for the two of you. You're both, and folks, if I can say, if you've not yet picked up Freeing Jesus, and if you've not yet picked up the Rebel Christ, there we go. Please get the books, read the books, share the books with your friends, sit around the dinner table, start an argument with the books, because I love that stuff. But you won't be disappointed by having them, because and they'll make great studies in any parish for those of you who are leaders in the church. So
yeah, that's great. Michael and Diana, thank you so much. You've been great friends to us, and we do appreciate your time, and I do wish you and your families a blessed Advent this season. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that was one of the best conversations we've ever had on our podcast. I was just enthralled by Diana and Michael talking, and some of the best ones we've done are, we try to put together, and Kevin does, questions and guideposts to take us along. But today we just kind of said, nope, let them go. And it was just perfect.
Things I didn't expect. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Didn't expect Bar Kokhba revolt. Okay?
No,
didn't expect that conversation about that. Didn't expect to have to worry about whether or not we were going to burn down the White House when Michael tore in on the Americans, right? It's like got an anti-American, didn't expect that. Did not expect that.
Didn't expect the Anglican Journal. Didn't want to talk about Jesus. That one shocked me a little.
We're not into that. We've got one of the best-selling authors in Canada in terms of religion and spirituality, who's an Anglican priest who can't get published in the Anglican Journal. Our standards are so high in the Anglican Journal.
That's right.
That, by the way, we're never going to be able to get published in there now after this.
No.
Because us making fun.
They're done with us.
Any other surprises from this today? I think those were some pretty significant surprises.
Yeah.
Any for you, Ian?
No, it was enthralling, I think is the word.
Yeah.
Well, they're both very bright, well-spoken individuals.
Oh yeah.
You feel like you could sit in a pub, set the two of them off on a rant, and just sit and drink and listen.
That's why I said, if we ever get a forum together with them somewhere down the road, when we get back to normal, we got to go to a pub, because that's a perfect pub podcast. So anyway, guys, it was great. Thanks so much. And we want to say thank you to our sponsors, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London, Middlesex, both family owned and operated, Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, Locally owned, locally operated, locally loved, and Molly made. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's.
I'm your friendly neighborhood Northwestern London, Ontario priest named Kevin George.
And my name is Ian. Thank you for listening.
Happy Advent, everybody. And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways.
Because someone could be coming going, I come a car now down the road. I don't want to make you into a toad before you cross the street.
Splat.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!